Seduction by Jean Baudrillard. Read by Stеaдyй Делта. Chapter 3. The Political Destiny of Seduction.
Take me around the world one more time.
The passion for rules. No player must be greater than the game itself. Rollerball. The Diary of the Seducer claims that in seduction, the subject is never the master of his master plan, and even when the latter is deployed in full consciousness, it still submits to the rules of a game that goes beyond it. A ritual dramaturgy beyond the law, seduction is both game and fate, and as such pushes the protagonists towards their inevitable end without the rule being broken, for it is the game that binds them, and the rule's basic dictum is that the game continue whatever the cost, be it death itself. There is then a sort of passion that binds the players to the rule that ties them together, without which the game would not be possible. Ordinarily, we live within the realm of the law, even when fantasizing its abolition. Beyond the law, we see only its transgression, or the lifting of a prohibition. For the discourse of law and the interdiction determines the inverse discourse of transgression and liberation. However, it is not the absence of the law that is opposed to the law, but the rule. The rule plays on an immanent sequence of arbitrary signs, while the law is based on a transcendent sequence of necessary signs. The one concerns cycles, the recurrence of conventional procedures, while the other is an instance based in an irreversible continuity. The one involves obligations, the other constraints and prohibitions. Because the law establishes a line, it can and must be transgressed. By contrast, it makes no sense to transgress a game's rules. Within a cycle's recurrence, there is no line one can jump. Instead, one simply leaves the game, because the law, whether that of the signifier, castration, or a social interdiction, claims to be the discursive sign of a legal instance and hidden truth. It results in repression and prohibitions, and thus the division into a manifest and a latent discourse. Given that the rule is conventional and arbitrary, it has no hidden truth. It knows neither repression nor the distinction between the manifest and the latent. It does not carry any meaning. It does not lead anywhere. By contrast, the law has a determinate finality. The endless, reversible cycle of the rule is opposed to the linear, finalized progression of the law. Signs do not have the same status in the one as in the other. The law is part of the world of representation, and is therefore subject to interpretation or decipherment. It involves decrees or statements, and is not indifferent to the subject. It is a text, and falls under the influence of meaning and referentiality. By contrast, the rule has no subject, and the form of its utterance is of little consequence. One does not decipher the rules, nor derive pleasure from their comprehension. Only their observance matters, and the resulting giddiness. This also distinguishes the passion for the game's rituals and intensity from the pleasure that attaches to obedience to the law, or its transgression. In order to understand the intensity of ritual forms, one must rid oneself of the idea that all happiness derives from nature, and all pleasure from the satisfaction of a desire. On the contrary, games, the sphere of play, reveal a passion for rules, a giddiness born of rules, and a force that comes from ceremony and not desire. Does the delight one experiences in a game come from a dreamlike situation where one moves free of reality, but which one can quit at any time? Not at all. Games, unlike dreams, are subject to rules, and one just doesn't leave a game. Games create obligations like those found in challenges. To leave a game is unsportsmanlike, and the fact that one cannot refuse to play a game from within, a fact that explains its enchantment and differentiates it from reality, creates a symbolic pact which compels one to observe the rules without reserve and to pursue the game to the end as one pursues a challenge to the end. The order instituted by the game, being conventional, is incommensurable with the necessary order of the real world. It is neither ethical nor psychological, and its acceptance, the acceptance of the rules, implies neither resignation nor constraint. As such, there is no freedom in our moral and individual sense of that term in games. They are not to be equated with liberty. Games do not obey the dialectic of free will, that hypothetical dialectic of the sphere of the real and the law. To enter into a game is to enter a system of ritual obligations. Its intensity derives from its initiatory form, not from our liberty, as we would like to believe, following an ideology that sees only a single natural source of happiness and pleasure. The game's sole principle, though it is never posed as universal, is that by choosing the rule, one is delivered from the law. Without a psychological or metaphysical foundation, the rule has no grounding in belief. One neither believes nor disbelieves a rule, one observes it. The diffuse sphere of belief, the need for credibility that encompasses the real, is dissolved in the game, hence their immorality, to proceed without believing in it, to sanction a direct fascination with conventional signs and groundless rules. Debts, too, are annulled. In games, there is nothing to redeem, no accounts to settle with the past. For this reason, games appear unaware of the dialectic of the possible and impossible, there being no accounts to settle with the future. There is nothing possible, since everything is played, everything decided without hope and without alternatives according to a relentless, unmediated logic. That is why there is no laughter around the poker table, for its logic is cool but not casual, and the game, being without hope, is never obscene and never lends itself to laughter. Games are serious, more serious than life, as seen in the paradoxical fact that in a game, lives can be at stake. Games, therefore, are no more based on the pleasure principle than the reality principle. They suppose the enchantment of the rule and the sphere that the rule describes, and the latter is not a sphere of illusion or diversion, but involves another logic, an artificial initiatory logic wherein the natural determinants of life and death have been abolished. This constitutes the specificity of games and their stakes. It makes no sense to reduce them to an economic logic that would speak of conscious investment, or to a logic of desire that would speak of unconscious motives, conscious or unconscious. This double determination may be valid for the sphere of meaning and law, but not for rules and games. The law describes a potentially universal system of meaning and value. It aims at objective recognition. On the basis of its underlying transcendence, the law constitutes itself into an instance for the totalization of the real, with all the revolutions and transgressions clearing the way to the law's universalization. By contrast, the rule is immanent to a limited and restricted system, which it describes without transcending and within which it is immutable. The rule does not aspire to universality, and, strictly speaking, it lacks all exteriority, since it does not institute an internal scission. It is the law's transcendence that establishes the irreversibility of meaning and value, and it is the rule's immanence, its arbitrary circumscriptive character, that leads, in its own sphere, to the reversibility of meaning and the reversion of the law. The inscription of rules in a sphere without a beyond, it's no longer a universe since it no longer aspires to universality, is as difficult to understand as the idea of a finite universe. A boundary without something beyond it is unimaginable. For us, the finite is always set against the infinite, but the sphere of games is neither finite nor infinite. Transfinite, perhaps. It has its own finite contours, with which it resists the infinity of analytic space. To reinvent a rule is to resist the linear infinitude of analytic space in order to recover a reversible space. For a rule has its own revolution, in the literal sense of the word. The convection towards a central point and the cycle's reversion. This is how rituals function within a cyclical world, independent of every logic of cause and effect, origin and end. This marks the end of centrifugal dimension, the sudden intensive gravitation of space and abolition of time, which implodes in a flash to become so dense that it escapes the traditional laws of physics, its entire course spiraling inwards towards the center where the density is greatest. This is the game's fascination, the crystalline passion that erases memory traces and forfeits meaning. All passion comes close in its form to the latter, but the passion for gaming is the purest. The best analogy would be with primitive cultures, which have been described as closed in on themselves, incapable of conceiving of the rest of the world. But in our society, the rest of the world exists only for us. Their closure, far from being restrictive, derives from a different logic, which, because we are trapped within the imaginary of the universal, can no longer conceive of except pejoratively as limited. The symbolic sphere of these cultures knows no remains. In games too, unlike the real, there is nothing left over, because they have neither history, memory, nor internal accumulation. The stakes are constantly being consumed and reversed, it being an unspoken rule that while the game is in progress, one cannot withdraw anything in the form of a gain or surplus value. They leave no residue within, nor is there anything that remains outside the game. The remainder supposes an unsolved equation, an unrealized destiny, something subtracted or repressed. But a game's equation is always perfectly balanced and its destiny always fulfilled without leaving any traces, something that distinguishes it from the unconscious. The theory of the unconscious supposes that certain affects, scenes, or signifiers can no longer be put into play, that they are foreclosed outside the game. The game, on the other hand, is based on the hypothesis that everything can be put into play. Otherwise, it would have to be admitted that one has always already lost, that one is playing in order to always lose. In the game, however, no objects are wasted. There is nothing irreducible to the game which precedes the game, and in particular, no previous debts. If within games something is exorcised, it is not some debt contracted vis-à-vis the law. It is the law itself that is exorcised as an unforgivable crime, as discriminatory, as irreconcilable transcendence within the real. And its transgression only adds a new crime to that of the law, and new debts and griefs. The law establishes equality as a principle. In principle, everyone is equal before the law. By contrast, there is no equality before the rule, for the latter has no jurisdiction over principles. Moreover, in order for everyone to be equal, they must be separated. The players, however, are not separate or individualized. They are instituted in a dual and agnostic relation. They are not even solidary. Solidarity, supposing a formal conception of the social, the moral ideal of a group in competition. The players are tied to each other. Their parity entails an obligation that does not require solidarity, at least not as something that needs to be conceptualized or interiorized. The rule has no need of a formal structure or superstructure, whether moral or psychological, to function, precisely because rules are arbitrary and ungrounded. Because they have no reference, they do not require a consensus, nor any collective will or truth. They exist, that's all. And they exist only when shared, while the law floats above scattered individuals. Their logic is clearly illustrated by what Goublot claims in La Barrière et les Niveaux is the cultural rule of castes, and of the bourgeois class as well. 1. Total parity amongst the players within the space created by the rule. This is the level. 2. Beyond the rule, the foreclosing of the rest of the world, this is the barrier. Within its own domain, extraterritoriality in the obligations and privileges, absolute reciprocity, games restore this logic in its pure state. The agnostic relation between the players can never jeopardize their reciprocal privileged status. The game might come to naught and its stakes lost, still the reciprocal enchantment and the arbitrariness of the rule at its source must be preserved. This is why dual relations can exclude all effort, merit, or personal qualities, above all in the pure form of the games of chance. Personal traits are admitted only as a kind of favor or enticement and have no psychological equivalence. This is how games go, as demanded by the divine transparency of the rule. In a finite space, one is delivered from the universal. With an immediate, dual parity, one is delivered from equality. With obligations, one is delivered from freedom. In arbitrariness of the rule and its ceremonial, one is delivered from the law, thus the enchantment of games. In a sense, we are more equal within ceremonials than before the law. Perhaps this accounts for the insistence on politeness, on ceremonial conformity, particularly amongst the less cultivated classes, it being easier to share conventional signs than signs laden with meaning or signs of intelligence. We also have more freedom in games than anywhere else, for we do not have to internalize the rules. We owe the rules only a token fidelity, and do not feel we have to transgress them, as is the case with the law. With the rule, we are free of the law. And of all the constraints of choice, freedom, responsibility, and meaning, the terrorism of meaning can only be dissipated by arbitrary signs. However, make no mistake about it, conventional or ritual signs are binding. One is not free to signify in isolation while still maintaining a coherent relation with reality or truth. The freedom demanded by modern signs, like modern individuals, to articulate themselves according to their affects or desire for meaning, does not exist for conventional signs. The latter cannot set off aimlessly with their own referent or scrap of meaning. As ballast, each sign is tied to others, not within the abstract structure of language, but within the senseless unfolding of a ceremonial. They echo each other and reduplicate themselves in other equally arbitrary signs. The ritual sign is not a representative sign. It is not, therefore, something worth understanding. Instead, it delivers us from meaning. This is why we are so committed to such signs. The gaming debt is a debt of honor. Everything concerning the game is sacred because conventional. In A Lover's Discourse, Roland Barthes justifies his choice of an alphabetical order in the following terms. To discourage the temptation of meaning, it was necessary to choose an absolutely insignificant order. That is to say, neither an intended order, nor one of pure chance, but a perfectly conventional order. For we must not, he writes, citing a mathematician, underestimate the power of chance to engender monsters, that is, logical sequences, meaning. In other words, total liberty or total indeterminacy are not opposed to meaning. One can produce meaning simply by playing with chance or disorder. New diagonals of meaning, new sequences can be engendered from the untamed flood tides of desire, as in certain modern philosophies, the molecular or intensive philosophies, which claim to undermine meaning by diffraction, hookups, and the Brownian movements of desire. As with chance, we must not underestimate the power of desire to engender logical monsters. One does not escape meaning by dissociation, disconnection, or deterritorialization. One escapes meaning by replacing it with a more radical simulacrum, a still more conventional order, like the alphabetical order for Barthes, or the rules of a game, or the innumerable rituals of everyday life, which frustrate both the political, historical, or social order of meaning and the disorder, chance, which one would impose on them. Indeterminacy, dissociation, or proliferation in the form of a star or rhizome only generalize meaning's sphere of influence to the entire sphere of nonsense, that is, They merely generalize meaning's pure form, an abstract finality, with neither a determinate end nor contents. Only rituals abolish meaning.